Hi, so welcome to my submission for CloudSpoke's Challenge 2755, which was to build a SmartsheetToolkit which interacted with the Smartsheet API. So the first thing, as you can see, there's an application for this that I've created, so it's the amount of clutter on the screen. So let's go through setup. So the first thing you'll need to add is to add some values for a custom setting. So custom settings, you'll need to add a record, Smartsheet API. Then when you manage it, so I've set them at the default organization level. We've got the client ID, which should be taken from your Smartsheet developer instance. The scope, which as a minimum you'll need read sheets, write sheets and create sheets. The API URL, the authorized URL, the client secrets, and the redirect URI. So that's the landing page that you come back to after going through the OAuth flow. So that's your custom settings. You also need to make sure that you have a remote sites. Going along one now, I move things around. Remote site settings, so make sure that you've got Smartsheet in here. Added it to the package, so it should create it fine. And then the last thing is just to note is on your user. So as you can see here, I've added a section, Smartsheet API. That's the user's access token and refresh token. Now, obviously, if they go through the OAuth flow, then these values will be set automatically. However, you can edit them and provide your own values. So I believe there's a place in Smartsheet where you can obtain your own access token, paste them in here, and you're good to go. So let's take you through the Visual Force pages that are created for this. So they're pretty basic. So let's go to the demo page. Basically what you see here is it's an authorized button, access token at the top, which is currently blank. So click on authorize. This forwards you to the Smartsheet login. A bit more time, probably would have put this in iframe, so you delete the application, but there you go. Credentials, log in, allow. If you deny, that'll throw an error. Now that's returning to me now a list of sheets which are in my developer instance of Smartsheet. Now I've got a number of actions I can take. So obviously refresh access token at the top here. You can click on that, then I'll just refresh the current access token. So make sure that works. You can see there's a new token there now. You can create a sheet. This is pretty basic. So basically what it does is you have to add at least one column by default. So for the purposes of this demo, I've just got it defaulting so that automatically it puts in this column of primary true, title primary column, text number. Yeah, you can specify the name, obviously, anything you want. Save that. Takes you back to the home page, and now you can see there's this new item in the list. If I drill into that, and it's returning the detail, so it's basically calling the get sheet method. So it returns the columns, more information about the sheet, the created date, modified app. You can now add a row. Again, this is pretty limited, it's just to really show off the sheet add rows function. So in this instance you can only add a single row. There's only one column value, but if you had multiple columns then they'd be listed. You can add a value for each. Let's just add a test value, save that. And as you can see now, when it calls the getSheet method, it's returning one row with one cell which matches the primary column. Go home. So show you the one that was created in Smartsheet. So here, for instance, you can see there's multiple columns this time round, rows, columns across. If you add a row, then you get a value for each. So it's basically just added another row in there. So that's pretty much the visual force pages that just kind of show it off in a pretty basic fashion. Let's go to Developer Console and check out some of the code then that sits behind this. It's already open. Okay, so let's go to the top here. So this is a utility class that basically does all the interactions with the Smartsheet API. There's a bit of setup at the top, so we've got a constant string. We've got an exception class that's used throughout this static class. We've also got a host of inner classes which are basically used to represent the objects returned by the Smartsheet API. So things like sheets, sheet, column, row, cell. We've also got a few response wrappers, so create sheet response, insert rows response, got a wrapper for the access token, and also for working with errors. So let's have a quick talk through the methods. So we've got this obtain authorization code. So basically builds the URL that redirects to the Smartsheet website where you input your credentials. Process authorization response. So basically when Smartsheet returns back into Salesforce, the landing page calls this method, which basically parses out the authorization code from the URL parameters. If there's any issues, so for instance if the state of this response doesn't match that was sent out in the obtain authorization code URL, then obviously it throws an error. Likewise, if any other error is returned, it also tracks those and throws them back. What else to mention about this? So in terms of what we pass around in the state, so I've been using the user's ID. So basically every request that goes out as the user, every obtain authorization code puts the user ID in, so that when we get the response back we know it's for the same user that requested it. Obtain access token. So once we've got the authorization code, basically do another call to the Smartsheet API to get an access token, which basically contains things such as the access token, the refresh token, and a couple of other bits of information. So again, we build the URL. This time we're doing a post, so we build a body, which basically just contains information like grant type, code, client ID, redirect to URI, and a hash, which is client secret and authorization code. Invoke the service, and then this is kind of a generic framework that I have for handling responses. So it basically checks for 500 or 5xx code. If that's encountered, logs the error first. It then checks to see whether the call-out limits have been reached, which is the first time round it won't have been. It refreshes the access token and refreshes the access token. So it basically calls itself again. And we'll keep trying until either the call-out limit is reached, at which point it will throw an exception, or obviously you could get a success, or the other option you could get is a 400 error, which basically indicates there's a problem with the actual request message, as opposed to a problem with the actual service, which is what the 500 codes represent. To 200 code range is for success messages. So if it's a success, we basically use the JSON deserialize to put the access token into the access token object and return it to calling function. We've got refresh access token. That pretty much works the same way as access token, but the main difference is that rather than using an authorization token to kind of submit the request, it uses the access token refresh token. Insert rows. So basically this allows you to insert rows against a sheet. So the sheet is denoted by the sheet ID. The rows, you can have one or more, and you must pass in the access token to use it. Basically parses the list of rows and creates a JSON representation which it submits to the API. Again, you can see the 500 code check. In this case, you can see it's refreshes the access token and then calls itself to have another go. And then 400 code checks and then 200 code checks. And this is basically, like I said, a common framework that's used on all of the API calls. So create sheets, works the same way. Basically converts a sheet into JSON, takes an access token as well, invokes the service, checks the response for 500, 400 codes, 200 code, so on. So I think you get the idea. So get sheets, same thing. Get sheet, same thing again. Just different parameters being passed in. We've got a kind of couple of helper functions. So there's a get user access token, which can be used to retrieve the access token, refresh token from the user's object. We've also got a set user access token. So pages controllers can use this to set user access token, refresh token when it's been returned by this class. We've also got the logging of HTTP response errors. So at the moment, just debugging it, but if you had a more advanced sort of logging framework, then you can maybe log it to an object. So that's basically the SmartsheetToolkit. There's obviously a host of controllers and pages that interact with this. I won't go into those in too much detail because they're really just a wrapper around this to demo how it should be used. We've got a test class. So again, each of the controllers have their own test class, but the SmartsheetToolkit test class basically is the one that kind of tests everything. So we've got some mock HTTP responses. So these are based on the examples that are in the API document that's hosted by Smartsheet. So we've just copied those from there. So we've got an example of 200 requests, so successes. We've also got some 400 examples, so these are kind of for the access token. So that's basically the obtain access token, refresh access token uses these. We've then kind of got generic mock 4xx response errors and 5xx response errors that are utilised by following test methods for each of the API calls, like create sheet, get sheet, so on. So here we actually start to use those. So for each SmartsheetToolkit API call, we basically check the 200 status code path, we check a 400 status code path, we check a 500 code status path. We basically rinse and repeat for all of the API methods, which basically gets the code coverage and tests the basic the execution paths through the code. Various system asserts just to make sure that the right things are being created. So, example here, like get sheets, checks that the example response has actually been passed correctly into the sheets output. So obviously you can go through these in your own time, but that kind of gives an overview of my submission, which I believe matches all the requirements. code coverage is high. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. But otherwise, I think you like my submission. Thanks a lot.